Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to this new series. So this is the first video in a new series I'm going to be starting, which is 5 T1D tips. Obviously there are 1,000,001 things to think about with diabetes, so I thought I'd break them down into little chunks with these small videos, just 5 tips each video, so you can get a little refresher on a couple of things you may have forgotten about, or if you're newly diagnosed, just take on little bits of information at a time so it's not an overwhelming amount of information each time. Obviously, big disclaimer as ever, it's important to say I'm not a nurse or doctor or medical professional in any way. You shouldn't change the way you're managing your diabetes based on what I'm saying. I'm just hoping these tips will point you in the right direction. Also, obviously, everyone manages their diabetes in different ways anyway. Some people have a pump, some people inject, some people have CGMs or Libras and other people don't. And certain things work for certain people and some things won't work for you that work for me and the other way around. So you do need to experiment a bit, but obviously, as I said, always with the guidance and support of a medical professional. So these tips will not be in any order, in any categories, they're just 5 things I think are important to talk about today. So let's start off with the first video of this series with tip number 1, which is thinking about your types of carbohydrates. Different foods obviously contain different types of carbohydrates, and these in turn have different effects on our blood sugars. So it's important before you inject and before you start even thinking about how much you're going to inject to think about not only the total amount of carbs but also what type of carbs these are. Slow release carbs will take a longer time to be absorbed into the body, and so you may need to inject differently for them. The biggest food for this, and I know I just said everyone reacts differently to different things with diabetes, but this is one thing that is the same for everyone, and that is pizza. You probably would have heard of the pizza effect. If not, I will explain it very quickly just now. So because there are such a huge amount of carbs in the pizza and they are so slow release, they take a really long time to be absorbed into the body. And so if you injected for all of the carbs at the beginning, when you pre-bolus for your pizza, you will have a hypo because all of your insulin will go in at once, but not all of the carbs will be used at once. And so you'll have a hypo, and then when the other carbs start to kick in, you'll spike because there'll be no insulin left to deal with those remaining carbs, but they will be slowly released from the pizza. So with this kind of thing, you need to spread out your injections. Obviously, it's different if you're on a pump. Unfortunately, I can't advise about that because I've never had one, but you should definitely look into the pizza effect if you have a pump and seek advice from someone who knows about that. But so what I do is I split my injection over at least 3 injections, which is annoying, I know, and it's why I don't eat pizza too often, because then I inject for about 1/3 to half of the carbohydrates before I eat my pizza. When I've finished eating the pizza, I do a blood test. If it's stable, I'll have a little bit more insulin because I know the carbs are going to slowly kick in. If it's dropping, obviously I'll leave it, and if it's going high, I'll have a lot more insulin because the carbs are kicking in faster than I had anticipated. Then I'll leave it again about 20 minutes to half an hour. It's difficult because you don't want to check it too soon because all the insulin might not have kicked in yet, but you don't want to leave it too long because that gives it a good chance to spike before you've caught it. So I'll keep checking every 20 to 30 minutes until all the pizza has been dealt with. This can take hours, this can take 4 hours or even longer. So I also try not to eat pizza after 6 or 7 p.m. just because I don't really want to have to stay up to carry on injecting to deal with those carbs. It's one of the unfortunate things of diabetes, but that's just one of those things. Another thing this can happen with is pasta for some people, but anything that has a really slow release carbohydrate. Second tip is very much linked to this one, and that is you need to learn how certain foods react with your body. Regardless of the type of carbohydrate, I also find that certain foods have a bizarre reaction on my sugars, and actually certain carbs don't seem to affect my sugars, and so if I inject for them I end up going low. For me personally, this is sweet potatoes, anything that's largely flour-based like wraps but not bread, which is strange, and also milkshakes from Five Guys. Although the Five Guys milkshakes are kind of in between this tip and the last one, it's also the high fat content means that their carbs aren't absorbed so quickly, and so I will spike later on with those. So I tend to do the same thing as I do with pizza. And I also have this with stuff like sausages. If they fill the sausages with a lot of like crap which has carbs in, and on the package if it says the sausage has carbs in it, these carbs don't personally affect my blood sugar. It may be different for you, but I do not inject for those carbs because they don't seem to affect me. Again, this is trial and error, differs person to person, but in general, that's the kind of thing that happens for me, and you need to do your own research. I would recommend keeping a list. If you always go low after a certain type of food, or you notice even twice it's a food you go low after, make a note, and then you'll know each time to adjust your ratios depending on that. My third tip is to not forget about insulin on board. So our fast-acting insulin can be in our system for a long time. For me, it can be in my system for up to 4 hours, but for you it could be more or less. So again, something to discuss with clinicians. But that means if you are eating within 4 hours of your last meal or the last time you injected, you also need to take into account the insulin that you've had in that previous injection. So for example, say an hour before dinner, my blood sugar is 12. So I have 2 units of insulin to counteract that. By the time I get to dinner, maybe it's only dropped to 9 because it hasn't had time for all the insulin to kick in. For me, when I'm high, my correction takes a long time to kick in. So that's probably about how long that would take for me. But that insulin should have brought me down to 6. So I know not to correct from 9 to 6 because I've already had that insulin an hour ago and it hasn't yet kicked in. If I would have had a correction unit for that when I have my dinner, then I'll end up going low because I'll have the 2 units that I already had, 1 unit of those is still left over, plus then I've got that unit again extra with my dinner insulin, and so it's too much insulin for the amount of carbs, the amount of correction that I need. So please don't forget about insulin that is already on board, is already in your system, because it will continue to act, it may just have not kicked in yet. This can be really frustrating. I'm actually personally considering maybe changing my fast-acting insulin because it does take a long time to correct. I pre-bolus 15 minutes before my meal and that seems to get those carbs, which is fine for me, but in terms of correcting, it takes a really long time, and it's quite frustrating when I'm wanting to eat my food. If I'm high, I have to wait a really long time. My fourth tip is caffeine, and specifically coffee, although some people also have a problem with tea. Caffeine can and will likely spike your blood sugars. It does for me, and particularly in the morning. In the morning I'm already very resistant to my insulin. I already spike in the morning anyway because of the dawn effect, which I'll be talking more about in one of my other tips videos. But for me, I don't really drink coffee too much anyway, but if I do, I make sure it's after I've already gone for my morning walk or had my morning workout, and after I've already got my body moving, because that helps to reduce the caffeine spike. And you may even need to inject for coffee, even if it's got no sugar, no milk, nothing, flat Americano. There's no, obviously, carbs in caffeine, but it can spike the blood sugar. And final tip for this video, tip number 5, is about splitting your basal insulin. So for a long time, I only had 1 injection of my long-acting insulin per day. In the evening, I would have like 36 units of insulin all at once. I found that for me, this didn't particularly work because by kind of late afternoon / early evening of the following day, I'd be spiking because my long-acting wasn't really carrying me over enough. So I switched insulin, and I'm now splitting my dose. So I have half of my long-acting insulin at 8 PM and half at 8 PM or near enough 8 PM and 8 AM, near enough 8 AM, depending on when I'm waking up that day. But it just means that, number 1, the insulin is never running out before I have the next dose, as long as I have it on time. And number 2, it means I can change the amount at each times of day. So for me, personally, I need more long-acting insulin overnight than I do in the morning. So splitting this gives me the ability to change. So at night, my basal insulin is a higher dose than when I wake up in the morning, because throughout the day I'm a lot more insulin sensitive, and at high I tend to spike a bit more. So splitting the dose has been really helpful for me. It's made a huge difference. And so if you're struggling with like spikes at the same time of the day every day, it's definitely worth something speaking to your clinicians about. So I hope these 5 tips have been useful. Trust me, I've got a Word document here full of lots of more sets of 5 tips for you, so they'll be coming out shortly. I'm thinking once a month, but let me know in the comments how often you'd like these videos and if they're useful to you at all, and also any other types of videos you would like to see on my channel soon. So yeah, I hope you guys all have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!